You're listening to the Conscious Her podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking more about the mask we often wear as highly sensitive souls and what that means. The story of my mask and how I struggled with it for most of my life, and then how I released myself from it. How stepping into your most authentic self is both the hardest and the most rewarding part of your life as a highly sensitive soul. And how the biggest thing that you have tried to push away in your life is also the very thing that you must become. There's a lot to unpack in this episode, so stick around. Hi, I'm Kimberly Morrow, and you're listening to the Conscious Her podcast. The Conscious Her is an accessible online platform and community of conscious women that are empaths, highly sensitive people, and intuitives who are both curious and passionate about spiritual and energetic self-development. As a professional psychic medium, spiritual guide and mentor, intuitive energy healer, and channel for over 5 years now, I dedicate my life to reconnecting energetically sensitive women to the divine within themselves so that they can live the most fulfilling, rewarding, and transformational life possible by remembering who they are and why they're here. If you're looking to learn how to leverage and apply your incredible energetic gifts in your personal and professional life and utilize your intuition and sensitivity as your personal superpowers, this podcast is for you. So let's dive into today's discussion right now. Hey, beautiful light being, and welcome to the Conscious Her podcast. It's your host, Kimberly Morrow here, but you can call me Kim for short. I'm your modern day psychic medium, spiritual guide and mentor, intuitive energy healer, spiritual channel, and of course, the creator of the Conscious Her. I wanted to talk about the birth of this podcast a little bit more, just to give you some fun insight around kind of the universal magic that went on before and during the birth of this podcast. So what had happened was this podcast has been floating around in my consciousness and in my energy field for the past, I would say 1.5 years. And my sister was actually the one who suggested creating a podcast. But at the time, I just thought, that's crazy. That's definitely not for me. And here we are today. What's really interesting is that around December is when I had decided that I was really going to go through and do this through the help of my spirit team. And when I asked my spirit team when I should be, creating and producing this podcast, they suggested January. And when I asked them when, they suggested January 21st, 2021. And I realized that there was some significance around this date. And even just looking at the numbers, like 01/21 2021 is really interesting, right? And what I had read about this date was that this date was actually the 21st day of the 21st year of the 21st century, which was so freaking cool. And I had also read recently from a trusted mentor of mine that this date was included in a very powerful portal of energy, which I thought was very interesting. The date can also be read backwards and forwards the same. So how cool is that on the date? The other thing too is that January 21st, 2021, that week in itself is the cusp between Capricorn and Aquarius. And I find it very interesting because I have a lot of Capricorn in my chart, and I also have Aquarius as my north node. And if you look at the characteristics of Aquarius in itself, it's very reflective of this type of podcast that I have here today, which is really interesting. I also happen to be recording and producing this episode on the Aquarius new moon. So there's tons of cool spiritual symbolism around the podcast and around its birth and how it came into the world. And I just wanted to share some of those fun facts with you. I called this episode Unmasking the Woman Behind the Conscious Her for a number of reasons, and I'll get to those shortly. But When I talk about the woman behind the conscious her, I'm not just talking about myself. I want you to know that I'm also talking about what could potentially also be very close or similar to your experience as well. So I don't want you to take this as I'm just going to be talking about myself the whole time. I want you to challenge yourself to see if you can relate or identify and see yourself in me when I go through and talk about this. If you're an energetically sensitive person or a highly sensitive soul, there's a good chance that you've created some type of mask for yourself that you wear more often than not out of protection. The mask that I'm talking about here is not meant to be deceptive or devious in any way. It's not ill intentions. It's not meant to cause anyone else harm. This mask of protection exists sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, because you've likely felt that you could not or cannot be who you are in a variety of situations and circumstances, and especially around other people throughout your life. Chances are it's been a constant tug of war within yourself between authenticity and inauthenticity, or masking yourself in order to feel accepted or acknowledged. This includes repressing, downplaying, or ignoring your intuition, your sensitivity, your energetic gifts and abilities. You've probably been challenged your entire life because you feel so inherently different, out of place, left out, misunderstood, and pressured to be someone and something you're not by adopting beliefs, mindsets, opinions through social and societal conditioning, indoctrination, your culture, even a religion that just doesn't resonate at all with you. And if you live in a Western-based, masculine-centered culture like North America, for example, this is especially prevalent. You've likely been brought up into a setting that just does not and still may not understand you, and that labels your highly sensitive soul as a weakness or as an undesirable trait in some regard. And because all of this, you've probably tried to force yourself into a life that your society or culture would prefer you to have, rather than the one that you actually want to have. Because you've convinced yourself for a while it's also what you want, even though it's not. But as highly sensitive souls and energetically sensitive people, we did not come here to be like everyone else. We came here to remember who we are, to reawaken our truest, most authentic selves so that we could heal and so that we could be of service to others, that we could raise the vibration of global consciousness and make the world a much better place, a place with much more light. And I spoke a lot about that in the previous and first episode. However, doing all this that I've just listed off, this is no easy feat, especially because as humans, we're social. We're a social group or pack species, and we need each other. Our most basic needs come from a sense of belonging to a community. And in this lifetime, we're being asked to step out of that mentality and out of that fundamental conditioning to remember who we actually are, and then to follow our soul plan or our divine missions. Our lives here as highly sensitive souls are asking us to be somewhat unconventional to the average person. The caveat to being human in this lifetime is that the more authentic we become by practicing taking off this protective mask that guards who we actually are, the easier life becomes in the long run, and the greater alignment we face, the more opportunities we have, the more love we attract, the more meaning and fulfillment we're able to achieve and actually become satisfied with. The longer you try to keep the mask on, the more you harm yourself. The harder life becomes, the more struggle you feel, the more you push things away from you that are actually meant for you, and the less you experience all of the things that you came here with intention to experience. You didn't come here to be more human. You didn't come here to go backwards. You came here to practice being in the human state and of the human realm, but not in it, which is a major, major balancing act in itself. I'm going to be sharing with you how I worked my way through this realization. So today, as your fellow highly sensitive soul, as your fellow energetically sensitive person, I'm going to be taking off this human mask for you. I'm going to be telling you my story. I'm going to be telling you what led me to start this podcast, and I'm going to be sharing with you what it really means to be the conscious her. I'm going to show you how I learned to take off my mask of protection and let my authenticity lead me through that feeling of darkness. I'm going to be vulnerable and real with you. And I'm going to share things that make me uncomfortable because I know in my heart there are people just like me who need to hear this so that they no longer feel so alone. And I want you to know that at times I still struggle with this mask of protection. It's not like I've completely let it go, and I think that's just part of being a highly sensitive soul in a human form. But as I continue to live out one of my highest values, which you likely have as well, which is authenticity, it gets easier and I get stronger. And I hope all of this really, truly inspires you. So I want to start out with some boring things and some fun things, and then I'll really break down my journey for you. So who am I? Well, you know who I am. I'm Kimberly Morrow. I'm a passionate light worker here on Earth. Some of my core values include authenticity, service, freedom, professionalism, integrity, and connection. I recently turned 30 years old and was born just south of Vancouver, BC, Canada. I hold a bachelor's degree in urban and regional planning from Ryerson University and later switched career paths in 2016 to the natural and holistic health and wellness field. And as I say that, I'm kind of laughing to myself because that's what I say to people who, that's like my safe way of saying what I do without saying what I do, because it's a form of protection. I mean, it's just funny. So that's kind of some boring stuff about me, some fun facts about me that you may not know. Well, I'm also an empath, highly sensitive person, and intuitive, aka a highly sensitive soul. And the funny part about that is I had no idea what any of those words meant until about 3-4 years ago. I'm a Scorpio sun, a Scorpio rising, and a Capricorn moon with an Aquarius north node and a Leo south node. I'm also on the Libra Scorpio cusp. I'm an INFJ with Myers-Briggs, 1 wing 9 on the Enneagram, and a 5-1 splenic projector in human design. If you study human design, and if you haven't heard of that, I highly suggest you do. I'm a social introvert. I love to connect with people, especially in small groups. That's my specialty, I'd say. Traveling is a huge part of my life, and at this point, I've traveled to 24 countries. My favorite countries thus far have been Egypt, Iceland, and Portugal. And top of my list for traveling is East Africa and Australia. I can communicate telepathically with animals. If you saw me on the street, you would never know what I did for a living. I had absolutely no idea I was a psychic medium until about 4 or 5 years ago. And before becoming an entrepreneur, I used to work in corporate real estate development, and I was convinced I wanted to become a real estate developer. So let's all laugh together on that one. If you're a highly sensitive soul, being in in the real estate industry is like probably one of the worst things that you could do for yourself. So those are just some boring and fun facts for you. But I want to get into my story. There's a lot of moving parts in my story, I'm not going to lie. And so I have broken it down as best as I can into sections, which I'll go through with you. But I want you to know that this is not like me rambling on about my life story. I'm actually I'm organizing it for you, and I want to reach a level of connection with you, and I want to reach a level of resonance with you, and hopefully you can find parts of yourself in my story. And I hope, my hope is that that encourages you. So I want to start out with a few kind of major points about childhood first, and then I'll move on from there. So what I find in this field and in this industry, people that are well-known authors, speakers, writers in the field who are also healers, mediums, psychics, and practitioners, many of them report and record all these profound experiences in their childhood, or they have like a well-known lineage of spiritual people in their families. And I just want to say right off the bat, I had absolutely no one in my family that was spiritual, and if they were definitely in the spiritual closet. And I also didn't have any profound paranormal experiences with the spirit realm. I didn't have any major premonitions or visitations from higher consciousness or aliens or anything like that. There was nothing like that present. But, to tell you the truth, I actually don't remember much of my childhood at all. One thing about my childhood that I do remember is that I was and am able to see energy moving around me. And maybe that's my one thing that's kind of profound about my childhood. I could see energy, except, and when I say see energy, I literally can see it with my own two physical eyes. I thought that everyone could see it, so I never questioned it or talked or spoke about it. My mom frequently described me as a very sensitive, more introverted, quiet, an old soul, and that I was overly supportive and loyal to others. I was a very intuitive child. I had many claircognizant and clairsentient experiences. I also remember sensing a lot of low frequency energies when I was younger, and I do remember sensing the energies of past loved ones, but I didn't understand what I was sensing at the time. I had no reference system or language for any of it, or any outlet for it either. So this is very common. I know a lot of listeners have highly sensitive children. So if you were a highly sensitive child, a lot of what I'm saying will probably resonate with you. And so when I was this age, a long time ago, we didn't have there was no conversation about this. There was no reference system, there was no language, there was no outlet. It just wasn't in my radar or on my radar whatsoever. But one interesting thing that happened was when I was around 9 I would say 9, 10, 11, I actually did a science project on intuition. And I was always fascinated by what intuition was in the human mind and what that represented and what that looked like. So little hints and sparks of this intuitive part of me were kind of sprouting in my childhood. And, it wasn't long before that all got squashed. So that was just, a few main points about my childhood that were significant. And the next section of my life after that, so young adolescence and teenage years, I kind of call that the rise of the highly sensitive soul in me, where those aspects of the highly sensitive soul start to become more prevalent, and also in an age where it's probably some of the most difficult times to be a highly sensitive soul. So once I transitioned into my teen years, my intuition was, like I said, completely squashed, disregarded, and it was my highly sensitive soul that became increasingly present into my being, into my personality, my temperament, everything about me. And I just want to say, I wasn't a weird or quirky kid. I didn't rebel. I wasn't a troublemaker. I was just your typical good girl. Studious, quiet, in the background, keep your head down, kind, supportive, play sports, be a good friend. There wasn't anything odd or weird about me. But my high school years were without a doubt the worst in my life. And if you have kids right now in this age, you may understand this, or maybe this was what you experienced too. I've particularly faced consistent bullying for no apparent reason. I had less than a handful of friends, maybe 1 or 3. 1 to 3, and I felt constant peer pressure to behave and look like other girls in my grade. This carried through to my other sports and activities at the time, which I eventually had to quit everything. I couldn't bring myself to join any cliques. I couldn't bring myself to assimilate, which made me a great target for people. I became that girl for people to hate on, and I had this maturity about me, this old soul about me, and it was very hard for me to relate to anyone or to find anyone else that I had something in common with. I didn't relate to any other kids my age. I felt very out of place. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, and I really did feel like an alien. So it was a very hard time for me. And what came out of that is that I eventually learned that it wasn't safe or acceptable to be myself in any regard. It wasn't safe or acceptable for me to be seen or heard for who I was. So it's like I felt like everything about me, there was something wrong about it, but I still felt this need, on the other hand, to be authentic. So I couldn't really be like other girls or other people in my grade. It was a very difficult time for me. And then once I got into university, much later, the same themes continued, except now I moved from bullying to constant instances of being taken advantage of and manipulated, and that continued for the next 6 years of my university schooling. The bullying came from friends, it came from peers, coworkers, employers, professors. It was everywhere. It was all around me, and I couldn't escape it. At one point, about halfway through, I was bullied for my porcelain skin and complexion. And that was just another layer of that feeling like I couldn't be myself. And then it got so bad that I thought to myself, well, I need to change this. So then I started tanning. I started spray tanning in beds, everything that I could to change my complexion and the look of my skin. So it got so bad that I became addicted to that. And then I got addicted to changing almost every aspect of myself so that I would no longer be bullied, I would no longer be a doormat, and people would actually like and accept me more. So I changed, my skin color, the makeup that I would wear, my hair color, my clothes, everything that I could change so that I would not get bullied anymore, to see if that would make a difference. And it did. And through this time, I remained very intuitive, but I pushed down my intuition and aside whenever it came up, and I got into this profound habit of constant self-abandonment and neglect. Ultimately, I learned that who I wasn't acceptable, and that life would be better if I just changed myself as much as possible in every shape and form. And basically, by the end of that, I had no idea who I was. It's really interesting when I think about it because growing up, I did feel like I had this moral compass that was pointing to me towards authenticity and believing in who I was. Yet there was so much in my world around me that presented me with this reality that didn't matter and shouldn't be of value. It was like having this deep knowing of that I needed to have that sense of self and to live that out, but it's like everything in the world around me that I experienced or how I experienced my reality presented the case that I was not and should not do that. So by the end of my kind of young adolescence into my young adult years, I just felt like I had no sense of self, even though that's what I believed in. And it was a very odd feeling for me. So the next part I call the rise of my spirituality, and this is where my intuitive senses and my spiritual self began to bloom. So a little bit later, while I was in university, I was about 21 or 22, I met a young man who is actually a well-known actor, though I'll leave him out of this. But we worked together at a nightclub in Toronto, and we became friends, and we just kind of clicked. And we started hanging out, and eventually he introduced me to I would say, spirituality. So he really liked crystals. He talked about Archangel Michael. He talked about aliens. And he was ultimately very spiritual and slowly began to open my eyes up to my own spirituality. He told me about how spirituality had helped him through his darkest times. And because of a lot of this, he seemed to reawaken this spiritual side of me and this intuitive side of me that had laid dormant in me for many, many, many years. I started to become more interested in getting readings done by psychics, palm readers, healers, that kind of thing. And one day I decided I would go into Indigo or Chapters. If you live in Canada, that's a very big bookstore. To go out and find out more about these tarot cards that he was talking about, these oracle cards. And instead, when I eventually came around to it, I found this New Age section, which is a section that I had never visited before or even knew about. And I started to look at some of the books in there. There was many books on angels and guides and that kind of thing. And about 4 hours later, I came out with like 5 or 6 books on the topic, and I was absolutely fascinated with it. And as I read more and more, I naturally opened up my own eyes and awareness without doubt or skepticism to this spirit realm around me. So when I started to read this type of information in these books, I thought to myself, how could this be possible? How is this real? How is this happening? How did I not know about this? And it was like this huge epiphany or light bulb moment for me, where I was just fascinated and I just accepted all of it as truth. It's like there was no hesitation around it. And as soon as I did that, all of a sudden my gifts were ignited and I started seeing regular signs from the angels. It was like, I always say, it was like the floodgates had opened completely. And my guides and my angels and my spirit team were absolutely ecstatic. I continued to remain open. I remained receptive, intuitive, and spiritual, but I never took it any further than that. I went to see psychic readers from time to time, but I never saw any of that in myself or that ability in myself. So it was a very interesting time. I always viewed everything like that as outside of myself, and I never recognized that all of this was coming from within. I graduated university in 2014 after 6 years, and I was feeling really proud of myself because I felt like I was checking off or ticking off all these boxes that I was told I was supposed to do in life. I was making my parents happy. I was getting those achievements under my belt, and I felt like I was winning at life. And that's where everything came to a screeching halt. So then we move into what I call the first major spiritual awakening. So fast forward to 2015. A year later, I had this fantastic corporate job in real estate development because remember, I wanted to be a real estate developer. So I had this corporate job in real estate development, this very high-end job in downtown Vancouver, and I thought I had it made. I had a good salary. I moved into a ritzy part of town with my own apartment. I was living by myself. I was shopping and dining all the time, and I was living the life, so to speak. But as time went on, there was this emptiness inside of me, this void, this unhappiness was getting undeniable, stronger, and just so much more ruthless. And as this happened gradually, I got increasingly more confused. In the summer of 2015, a few months later, my sister saw this woman in North Vancouver for a Reiki healing, and she told me that I should go. I had no idea what Reiki was or what energy healing was, but I trusted my sister, as I always do, and I went. And I had a profound experience that just blew my mind. Not long after that, my sister took Reiki level 1 with the same energy healer in North Vancouver, and then insisted that I do it too. So naturally, I followed her advice and took Reiki level 1. And for the first time, I felt like I was learning about something that touched me, that moved me, that resonated with me so, so deeply. And I just wanted more and more of it. It was kind of like the first time I started reading about angels and spirit guides times 10. It was such a shock to the system in the most beautiful way. And while I was feeling very unsatisfied with my job, with my life, and I was feeling more and more inspired by spirituality and through Reiki, I came back to an interest of mine, which was crystals and crystal healing, which had been brought to my attention by my friend several years prior. And because I'm a creative, design-oriented person who had absolutely no outlet for that at the time in this corporate real estate job, I decided I wanted to start making Reiki-infused gemstone and crystal jewelry as a hobby. And there's a whole story behind that too, but I will not get into that today. And this hobby later turned into a little business, a small business, which I called at the time Crystal Theory Jewelry. Between 2015 and 2016, a little while later, my family and I went on a holiday together to Hawaii, which was unbelievable, and I feel so very grateful that I had that opportunity. And the day before we had to fly back home, I had this massive anxiety attack where I realized that my whole life essentially was a lie. My whole life, I was under this big old mask. I hated my life. I was deeply unhappy. I felt completely lost. I felt fake. And I was constantly trying to fill a void that I couldn't. I felt like a puppet at my job who had absolutely no voice and that wasn't valued. And I was constantly questioning myself and wondered, is this what life is? Is this what I spent all of my teen and young adolescent years to achieve? And it just ate away at me. And during this corporate job, what I really didn't understand was that this job was slowly eating away at me as a person and as a highly sensitive soul. Slowly but surely, the stress, the fear, the pressure with the job began to manifest physically and powerfully in my body as ailments, sickness, illnesses, setbacks, and I became increasingly and rapidly unwell over 2016 until I literally could not function anymore. And I want to point out as well that this will be another episode to tell you about that particular story with my physical health, because that's a really important one. By the end of 2016, so by the end of that same year, I had to quit my corporate job and I had to quit my corporate life. I gave up my condo. I gave up my, what felt to be like my friends, my lifestyle, everything that I spent the entire last years of my life creating and building. And I felt like I was having essentially a quarter life crisis. I felt like a loser. I felt so lost. I felt like a failure. I felt like I couldn't understand what was happening to me. And I moved back home with my parents. I didn't see any other option. And it was at this time that I experienced my first major, groundbreaking, powerful spiritual awakening. My health was in the toilet. I felt like I had no friends or family who understood me. My parents constantly looked at me like I was crazy. I felt very vulnerable, very emotional. I was in a very dark place. And it's safe to say that, in my opinion, I hit complete rock bottom and I couldn't even recognize myself. The only thing that I did know was that I needed to heal. I knew that I needed to heal myself. I knew that I needed to get better. I had no idea what I was doing, where I was going, what I was supposed to do now. I was completely in the dark and I had to take it back to square one, which was my health. And The problem that many of us face as we grow up is we're brought into a world where everything is decided for us and everybody tells you what to do. Permission for everything comes from outside of yourself, and the more of a good girl or good boy you are, the more you will be rewarded. So if you follow all the rules and do what you're told, the higher value that you have, and the more you will be recognized, and the more you will achieve. But what you learn as you get out of school is that that's not actually the case. And that's kind of what I realized, is I was completely lost in the dark. I had no one to tell me what to do now. So then I moved into a part of my life which I call the Great Rebuild. So after 2 months of unemployment, in that feeling of darkness and rock bottom, every time I went to look for a job in a related field, so in either in urban planning or in real estate development, I literally felt sick to my stomach. And my intuition was just going crazy. So I eventually just said, okay, I'm going to listen. And I just stopped doing that. And I said to myself, what do I actually want to do and what do I need to do? And the answer to that was to focus on healing and what would bring happiness back into my life. I eventually found a job with, you may have heard this company before, Sage Natural Wellness. And then a few months later, I also got a second job at a company called Bar Fitness. And I used those 2 jobs together to help heal myself naturally. And I began to include spirituality back into my life. And I began to use my intuition again and actually recognize it instead of pushing it down. I decided that I was going to take care of every aspect of myself. And it was around this time that I started to learn about what it actually meant to be an empath, a highly sensitive soul, and things just started clicking and making sense for me for the first time in my life. While I was working at Sage and Bar Fitness in 2017, a couple years later, I started drawing in all of these amazing people into my life, and I just felt like more and more of myself. During this time, I met a very, very special woman who is now my mentor. She is my mediumship mentor. And when I met her, it's like I recognized her immediately, even though she was a complete stranger. And shortly after I met her, I began training with her through intuition development courses, because to me, my intuition was screaming, yes, you need to go and learn from this person. I really resonated with her. I was really drawn to her. And of course, my intuition was right. And while I did this, I also continued to achieve different levels of Reiki and develop my intuition with my mentor. I realized that I had these incredibly strong and blossoming psychic and intuitive abilities, and I began practicing with them and integrating with them. And my mediumship mentor, she helped me to develop them responsibly, safely, efficiently, effectively, and ethically. And in early 2018, while I was still working at Sage and Bar Fitness, I decided to start my own Reiki practice, which I called Kimberly Lauren Reiki. And I even started selling my jewelry from Crystal Theory Jewelry in local retailers and businesses like Bar Fitness. And I felt really good because I felt like I was working within my community and I didn't have to go too far from home. And I was surrounding myself with people who understood my path and what I was going through and what I was creating. At the end of 2018, I was very close to having healed myself in every area of my life. But at the same time, I was pushing myself very, very hard to not only work these 2 jobs, so one full-time, one part-time, but also to develop these 2 small businesses on the side to make everything work, to make ends meet, to be able to pay the bills. There were many times that I wanted to give up. Many, many times when I thought this would just be a lot easier if I just gave up and just went back to a job. But there was this feeling and this inner knowing in me that kept me from giving up. It was like that sick feeling that I felt when I tried to apply for jobs in urban planning and real estate development. It was that same feeling, except it was saying, no, you cannot give up. You cannot give up. And one job that I was working at, they even asked me to consider quitting my quote unquote passion project so that I could become a manager. And I said, absolutely not. And not long after that, I quit that job. During Christmas holidays of 2018, you may be surprised to know this, you may already know this about me, I was rushed to the ER. I ended up having toxic shock syndrome and a septic infection, which are extremely deadly. And I was just hours away from losing my life. I spent the next 5 days in the ICU, in the intensive care unit, in critical condition, hanging on from 1 minute to the next. And I mean, this is a whole episode in itself, which I will do at some point to help you understand my journey with that. But I'll just sum it up and say it gave me a lot of perspective and it gave me a lot of gratitude about my life. It's almost as if the universe said, if you don't snap out of it, if you don't get yourself out of the way, you can have this all taken away from you. It shook me to my core. It was like a wake-up call, and it made me realize that I needed to step up and I needed to start taking life by the reins and start creating the life that I wanted for myself. I needed to get back into the driver's seat. And I knew that I could offer more to the world and that I had been playing small and that I wasn't being fully true or authentic to myself. The one thing that I valued so much, I wasn't embodying any of it. So after that wake-up call in around January 2019, when I was still recovering from being in the hospital, I just had this newfound fire within me, and I decided to combine my two small businesses, so Crystal Theory Jewelry and Kimberly Lauren Reiki, and then I evolved that into what I call Crystal Theory Co. So Crystal Theory Co. I still have to this day, but as time went on, I realized that I was able to help a lot of people in a significant way, but that I was limited in terms of time, so the time that I had and the exposure that I had. And I really felt the urgency to be able to reach more people, to help them heal and to step into their authentic selves, just kind of like how I did. So in order to quit my full-time job and to still make a living, I took a job as a contractor at this sound healing studio in Vancouver to teach classes and to provide Reiki healing sessions to clients. And I really felt like that was a really positive, progressive step forward for me to be living in my authenticity. And after about 8 months there, they ended up basically telling me that I was indirectly threatening them and that I couldn't have my own business or practice and work there at the same time. So naturally, I quit immediately. And I'm really glad that that happened, because if it didn't happen and if we didn't have that conversation, I probably would not have had the courage to go out on my own, because there was always a part of me that was saying, you're not qualified enough, you're not good enough, you shouldn't be doing this, you can't make money, you can't generate any money doing that, you'll never be able to pay yourself, that kind of thing. And miraculously, obviously, the universe always has your back when you take these leaps of faith. 2 weeks later, I was actually able to secure a healing space, an office at this beautiful, beautiful little business called The Heart, which is where I also sold my jewelry with Crystal Theory. And I was able to run Crystal Theory full time out of this space. And it was absolutely amazing. And people were, people were showing up. I was getting clients and it was really beautiful. And by spending all of this time with clients and regularly channeling and connecting with the spirit realm, using my intuition, developing in all of those skills, I was also expediting my own healing and ascension. I was gaining so much knowledge that I wanted to share with others. I just felt so compelled to share with others. Over the course of 2019, I became increasingly interested in bringing my business online. And I wanted to share all this knowledge and insight and wisdom that I have. And I wanted to start creating courses or a membership and other different types of offerings online, but I didn't quite know how I would do that or what the heck I was doing. It just came to me as this download that something that I needed to do, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I didn't act on it. At the same time, during 2019, after taking on many clients, running group workshops and events, doing readings, teaching Reiki with crystal theory, I realized that there was this distinct pattern with the women who were drawn to me for their healing and for their own spiritual development. And they were coming to me for the services that I offered for a reason. It wasn't just random, it felt very divine. And what I realized is that they were all like me. They were all empaths. They were all highly sensitive people. They were intuitive, extremely intuitive. And they, at the same time, they lacked a community and they lacked belonging, just like I had felt for my entire life. They all had the same concerns. They all had the same questions, doubts, fears, perspectives. They all had the same types of challenges, traumas, common experiences with their spiritual health and well-being, and no one to turn to or bond with or connect with over this beautiful part of them. They lacked the education that would serve them and help them realize that their intuition and their energetic sensitivity was a gift. So into the fall of 2019, I realized that this is what my online venture would become. This is what it was supposed to be about. I knew without a doubt that my role was changing, and there was a deep fundamental shift happening within me. I knew I needed to become a leader. I knew I needed to become an educator and a mentor to these women who were just like me, so that they could begin to heal again, just like I did, to uncover their authentic selves, to reawaken, and to transform their life through rediscovering their soul path, their divine missions, and why they came here. The universe at this point was really asking me to step up and to level up. And that's when I became the conscious her. And the conscious her was born. It all started as an inspired idea where I knew I could serve in the most authentic way possible and to give others what I knew they needed, that I wish that I had in my life prior. And this is also where the idea of a podcast sprouted. But in order to really do this, I would need to fully own, step into, and utilize all of my gifts and abilities and actually call myself a psychic medium. For so long, I had such a hard time calling myself a psychic medium, but also a spiritual guide, a teacher and mentor, an intuitive energy healer, a spirit channeler. So I started on that runway in early 2020 and began planning and building the conscious her. And a few months later, as you can recall, in early 2020, we had the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and everyone was kind of forced to stay in and stay home, and crystal theory took a huge tumble. And ultimately, I had to give up my healing space and all of my services at this beautiful little store that I love so much called The Heart. But I realized that this was a perfect time for me to begin building out the conscious her. Like really fully build out the conscious her, like dedicate all of my time to it. And the first thing that happened was that my spirit team guided me to create a course. And I had always wanted to start teaching courses. And the first course that they asked me to create was on spirit guide communication. And then secondly, they were asking me to create a membership, and which is now called the Inner Circle. And all of this then launched in September of 2020, not that long ago. When I really thought about a podcast at the same time, I knew that I loved connecting with people. I'm a social introvert, and being in service to others, and connecting with people and being in service to others are among my top values in life. I also knew that I loved writing, and I have since I was a very little girl. And I knew that I also loved speaking and sharing ideas and experiences with others. So it became a natural, perfect solution to helping me reach more people and use my natural talents, the ones that my soul wanted me to use and express myself with, that I had never been able to ever before. And I've already brainstormed about 150 episodes in advance, just so you know. And here we are on episode 2, and I have to say that I'm loving it. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned that I became the conscious her. And to me, the conscious her represents a sacred yet challenging journey of a highly sensitive soul returning to her truest, most authentic self and remembering her divine missions here on earth and just being relentless with it. The conscious her no longer wears a mask of protection and denial. She is unapologetically herself and embraces herself, her energetic gifts, intuition, and sensitivity as her superpowers. So the conscious her represents my journey, but I feel it also represents the journey of hundreds of thousands of women out there right now. And if you're listening right now, you might be one of them. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is that you must transcend through all of the illusions in your external world that try and prevent you from living your life authentically and truthfully. Regardless of where you're brought up in the world, this is usually the case. This is usually the case for everyone, not just those who are highly sensitive souls. The difference is that those who are not highly sensitive souls usually do not feel the same type of divine calling, the same type of lingering feeling that they're missing something, that there's still something for them to discover, or that there's still something for them to do. There's an intensity to the calling and to that feeling that you can't really escape from. The longer you ignore it, the worse it gets. But for highly sensitive souls, it's not just anything. It's a divine and specific purpose that only they can do. And that particular thing is something that not only serves themselves, but it also serves others. It's to help raise global consciousness and the vibration of the earth. And many times it comes hand in hand with the specific gifts and abilities that the highly sensitive soul has. This can take years and years and years for us to figure out properly, because ultimately when we came to Earth, we forgot about all of that. See, the more authentic you become with yourself, the more you step into your truth, the faster you expedite the uncovering of yourself for who you truly are and why specifically you came here, but also the gifts and abilities that help you fulfill your divine missions. Yet for most of us, our authentic selves, our true soul expression, our most vulnerable selves, as soon as we get here, we learn over time, and as we get older, to push it farther and farther away from us because it doesn't look like anyone else and what they're doing. We feel out of place, like we don't belong, like we're the black sheep, And we battle with our primitive human brains and our human selves against our spiritual cosmic selves for as long as possible. It becomes a daily, sometimes constant battle where we try to assimilate and to fit in. But over time, the universe shows us that doing that day in and day out only makes us break down even more. Eventually, our bodies will respond and manifest dis-ease to reflect that. Our bodies will protest until we get it, until we figure it out. Chances are that if you're listening to this, you're a highly sensitive soul and an energetically sensitive person, and that there is likely many times in your life where you can recall yourself desperately pushing away your authentic self to avoid your authentic self or to critically minimize your authentic self. At some point in your life, and maybe you're still in it, it's like a desperate need to stay committed to wearing the mask. But staying committed to wearing the mask and pushing away your authentic, truest self in every and all situations will only do more harm than good. The one thing that you have tried to push away your entire life, your authenticity, is actually the one thing that the universe is asking you to fully become. Becoming your most authentic self is the answer to everything in life, because that's what the universe created you to be, and therefore to do. Once you get there, you step into greater alignment and you experience much greater ease and flow in your life, and things just fall into place and start to make sense. The universe and all of those in spirit who are helping us, they just want us to live the most joyous, fulfilling, and happiest life we can here. The worst thing you can do while you're here is just waste away your life by just passively existing. So, here's a few questions you might want to ask yourself and to contemplate. In what ways am I still wearing my mask? How does wearing my mask show up in my daily life, and how does it affect me? Am I experiencing unexplainable disease, illness, or ailments? How can I gently and compassionately begin healing the mask I've been wearing, and where can I get support for this? If you can feel my energy right now and everything is resonating with you and you can feel a spark within you around this, please subscribe to this podcast, because I know that there is something for you here to learn, to grow with, to expand on, to heal. And I invite you to take this spiritual journey with me and my community. Secondly, if you resonate with what I'm saying today and you feel like I might be a good person to teach you, to guide you, or to mentor you, you can head over to my website, www.theconsciousher.com, to find out more about how we can start working together. Know that I am sending you so much love and compassion around this topic, and it is my sincere hope that by listening to my story and by listening to this episode, that you may have experienced some form of healing from it, and even some inspiration to make the changes you know you need to live a more enriched and more fulfilling life. Thank you so much again for listening, and take care. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode and for listening to the Conscious Her podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here and a part of our community. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you subscribe and share it on your social media channels with your spiritual soul sisters, friends, family, and network. Chances are, if this resonated with you, it will for them too. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I'm here to help. You can email me at hello@theconsciousher.com, and I may even use your question or topic of discussion for a future podcast episode. If you want daily support for your highly sensitive soul, please visit me over on Instagram at @theconsciousher. If you're interested in working with me, visit www.theconsciousher.com and be sure to subscribe to my mailing list. Finally, I do have a personal request. I believe that our purpose here is to heal ourselves and to serve others, and together you and I can help more people. If you would please leave a positive review for this podcast on iTunes, I'd be so eternally grateful for your support. Thank you and have a great day.